Hey friends, Elizabeth here from Plant-Based Bride, and I'm back again with another video, and this one is a Tombow Brush Pen Moon tutorial. Now, if you're new to my channel or you just haven't seen my last few videos, you may not know that I've had a little moon thing going on over the past couple of weeks. I put out my July Plan With Me video in my bullet journal, which was a moon theme, and I had actually purchased watercolors so I could do watercolor moons on watercolor paper and glue them into my journal, and I really love how it turned out, and you folks did too. You were requesting to see a slowed down tutorial style video on how I painted the moons because I had to speed them up quite a bit in that video. So I did that for you. That video is up on my channel. Both of those videos, the Plan With Me and the watercolor moon tutorial, will be in the cards of this video and linked in the description box if you haven't seen them. But I also offered a Tombow brush pen version, and you folks seemed very interested, and that is what this video is. So I am using my Tombow brush pens on watercolor paper and using a brush to apply the pigment. So let's jump right into it. So I'm starting off with my darker Tombow brush pen. I only used two colors for this whole moon, a darker brown and a lighter beige. So the brown color is 977 and the lighter beige color is 990. So I'm starting with the dark brown and I'm just coloring it onto this plastic page protector and then wetting my brush and picking up that pigment with the brush and starting to paint onto my watercolor paper. And I'm following the pencil line that I can still see that I erased almost completely, but left just a tiny bit of a line so that I could try to make a generally circular shape. I wanted to start with a pretty light wash of color all over the moon just to kind of get a base, darker on the outer edges and then lightening up by the center. I knew I wanted the center to have a light area, sort of a highlight, so I didn't want to add too much color in the center there. Once I had the general wash of color around the edges, I started to darken up the right side there, just in the exact same way, picking up some water with the brush and dipping it into the pigment and then applying it to the page. I put down some more of the brush pen to get more color, and here I'm adding more of a sharper outline to the right side of the moon. You have to work a little bit quicker with the brush pens than you would with watercolor. You still have a bit of time to blend them out, especially if you're using watercolor paper and a brush. If you're using watercolor paper and the clear blender, then you have even less time to blend it out. And if you're doing it on regular paper, journal paper, you have to be blending it immediately. You have almost no time before it starts to dry off because you can't have as much water on your brush, so it doesn't stay wet and malleable for quite as long. This video, by the way, is only sped up 2 times, so it is 2 times regular speed. So here I'm just dotting in more color in a pretty irregular pattern. Again, just kind of darkening up the sides there and getting some sort of irregular dots and splotches. This is just to try to approximate an irregular surface on the moon. and adding some more of that dark brown Tombow brush pen so I can have more pigment available. So this time when I put water on my brush, I just dried it off a tiny bit on my paper towel and picked up the pigment so it would be a little bit darker to start. You definitely have to pick up more pigment more frequently using this method than using actual watercolors, because there isn't quite as much pigment available to pick up than if you were dipping directly into a watercolor paint. I found that I got a much lighter effect and had to keep building it up in layer after layer to get the look I was going for. For this moon, I didn't actually use a reference photo. After all that I talked about reference photos in my watercolor moon tutorial, I just felt like kind of playing it by ear, especially as this was the third time trying to film this video and the fourth moon I was trying to paint for you using Tombows. I just wanted to kind of create whatever I wanted to create. So this was just coming out of my brain, and I was just trying to do what I thought would look cool. So really the only two techniques I used at the beginning of this moon process was painting on in smooth strokes when I wanted to have more of a blended look or a wash of color, or picking up the pigment and kind of adding it down in splotches or tapping it into the page. Patting it in is probably more accurate when I wanted more of a splotchy, irregular look. And as you can see, I just keep building it up on top of that same area again and again to create a darker section and darker splotches. And here I'm picking up some more pigment and again just darkening up that upper area a little bit more, again using a light wash of color just to fill it in. And I'm starting to run out of pigment here, so it's not adding a lot of color, so I'm probably going to have to get some more pigment down on my plastic in a moment. Now I'm going to go in with my smaller brush. It's just a more of a detail brush. You could still use a larger brush for this, but I just found it a lot easier with a thinner brush. Again, if you just have one brush, you can totally make a moon with just one brush, or even just with the clear blender brush pen. But if you do happen to have a larger brush for filling in larger areas and a smaller detail brush, then it can make it a lot easier to get the look that you're going for. And again, this is just kind of the style of moon that I am a fan of, just having all the little lines and splotches and patterns and details. I just find it a little more interesting. There are definitely moons out there and ways to do moons that don't have quite so many details, that still give a great effect. But I like all the little lines and details. I just find it adds a lot more interest and texture, and it's kind of fun to do, to be honest. It is definitely time consuming though, I will say that. So again, just picking up the pigment in the exact same way on my smaller detail brush and adding little lines, little splotches. A common thing that I do here is really just outline the edges of earlier splotches that aren't really very dark. So the splotches I made with my larger brush, I'm just kind of outlining using the detailer brush. And I picked up my larger brush again and am again just blending out that upper area with quite a bit of water. Adding a little bit more depth to the lower left-hand corner. Again, I'm working in a bunch of layers on this moon. Because the Tombow pigment dries a lot quicker than watercolor, I found I almost never had to stop for more than a minute to let a layer dry before I could keep working on that area. So that part of it was definitely faster. Again, just adding even more pigment to that corner. I'm going in with a detail brush again, and again, just doing the exact same sort of method of darkening up the edges and the outline of splotches I already made. And then just adding a couple irregular splotches and squiggles along the bottom side there to make it again a little darker. And I felt like that top area was a little bit too light. The transition was a little sudden, so I added some more color there. Now at this point I was feeling happy with what I'd done and decided to start with highlights. I actually ended up going back in and adding more of the brown color after I do the highlights, but this is the order I actually did it, so this is what I'm going to show you. So I started highlighting using my Jelly Roll gel pen, and I'm just adding a bunch of dots as highlights. This is definitely more tedious than my method with watercolors of flicking gouache all over my painting. That was definitely faster, even though I did it a bunch of times. This one, having to deliberately place every single dot, took more time, but it was nice because I could decide exactly where I wanted them to go, as opposed to them just landing wherever they landed. So I started off with a bunch of just tiny ones, essentially the size of the nib of the gel pen. And then once I was happy with that, I decided to add a few larger highlights. Definitely one in the center there. That's where I wanted the major highlight of the moon to be, which is why I left it with almost no pigment on that area at all. So I added my larger highlight and then lines radiating out from it in exactly the same style as I did in my previous videos. I went over a couple of the lines a few times to try to make them a little bit brighter, and went over that center dot quite a few times to make it as clear as possible. It is almost impossible to see on camera because it is on almost white paper, but it is a little bit more visible in real life. I then added another highlight in that top left-hand side, again with lines radiating out from it, but a little bit smaller because it's not the main highlight. And then I decided it would look nice to have one more highlight in that lower left-hand side. And again, it has smaller lines radiating out because it, again, is not the main highlight. That center highlight, I really wanted to be the biggest one, and then the other two smaller. Then I decided to add some larger dots around, so larger highlights without the lines, but just a little bit of a bigger dot in certain areas, just to add a little bit more to the irregular feel. Instead of every other highlight being exactly the same size dot, I wanted some larger and some smaller, which was an effect that I got more easily with a splattered paint because it just did that. Some of the dots were a little larger than others, so I tried to kind of emulate that with my gel pen. Once I was done with the highlights, I decided I did want to add a little bit more detail to my moon, so I picked up my beige brush pen and I decided to apply it directly using the brush end tip, and started to apply, again, these little irregular lines and patterns and shapes all over the top area of the moon, the lighter area, for a little bit more detail and texture. I feel like texture is my favorite word to describe how I like my moons to look. I wonder how many times I've said texture in the last 3 videos on my channel. Probably a lot. So I don't know if I really have any tips for how to do this. I'm really just making shapes and lines and blobs and dots and things that give it an effect that I like. It's very random and it's really just how I like it to look. So I'm sure yours would look completely different because you'd add them where you think they would look good and you'd add them in the way that you like. Or maybe you wouldn't do them at all because you don't really like them. And that's cool. It's one of the best parts about art and being creative is that we can all do it our own way. So now that I'm happy with those details, I'm going to go in with my darker brush pen and I'm going to do the exact same thing in the darker areas of my moon and add these extra dark details and lines and splotches and dots, and also darken up that bottom left hand side a little bit more along the very edge. So these details are details I did with my smaller brush in the watercolor version of this tutorial. But again, I found with my Tombows that they really did water down quite a bit in application and the pigment didn't spread as far before having to reapply it. So I actually found it just way easier to apply the color directly using the brush pen than using the brush, especially for all of these details that I wanted to be quite dark. I also used this opportunity to try to round out the moon a little better. I definitely had kind of made the bottom edge of the moon a little wonky in earlier stages of this moon, so I tried to fix it a little bit. It's definitely still not a perfect circle, but again, that's not really what I'm going for. I'm going for texture, people. Texture. Not perfection, but texture. So I'm concentrating these details further down and towards the left in the darkest area of the moon, but I am adding a few more kind of around in other places just to make it a little more interesting and so it doesn't seem artificial. And I decided to add a few more details using my beige Tombow just because I noticed a couple spots that could use it. And then I grabbed my darker Tombow again because I didn't like how the edge of that dark area looked. I felt as though it was a little bit of a harsh transition from the lighter and medium shades into the darker shades. So I kind of kept building that up for a little bit until I was happy with how that area looked and how the detailed areas and the splotches had more of a subtle, gradual transition. And really I could have done this all day, but I eventually got to a point where I felt like it looked pretty good and I was happy with it and I decided to stop because if you're a perfectionist like me, you know you can just go on forever. And sometimes if you go on for too long, you go too far in the wrong direction and you mess it up. So I decided to stop while I was still happy with it. And this is the final result, my watercolor style moon using my Tombow brush pens. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it fun. If you decide to recreate this, if you want to create your own Tombow moon, or if you want to do a watercolor moon, please tag me on Instagram. I would love to see your recreations. I've already seen a few and it just makes me so happy. I become such a giddy little kid when I get a direct message or I get tagged on Instagram and it just makes me super happy. So if you want to share them with me, please go ahead and do that. My Instagram is probably the easiest way to do it and I am Elizabeth Turn on there. I'm also linked in the description box if you want to click through that way. And you can tag me or you can send it to me in a direct message. You can also send me your story if you share it that way. And I would love, 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 love to see it. If you enjoyed this video and the other videos in this Moon series, please give this video a like. It lets me know that you are enjoying this kind of content and you want to see more from me. And if you aren't subscribed already, please consider subscribing and joining the family. If you are subscribed, hit that bell notification. I know how frustrating it can be to hear every creator out there ask you to hit the bell, but to be honest, YouTube really isn't sending out content into people's subscription boxes in the same way that it used to. And I know for a fact that a bunch of my subscribers are not seeing my videos in their subscription box, which really sucks for both of us, because I'm creating this content to share with you and you subscribe because you want to see it, but you're not getting it. And that's really too bad. So hit that notification bell so that you'll be sure to see my videos when I post them. I am not the kind of YouTuber that posts daily, so you will not be inundated with notifications. I promise. You can also follow me on Instagram if you aren't already, because I do always post about new videos on Instagram. So you will be up to the minute usually of when I'm filming and when I'm editing and all of the whole process. I usually share that with my Instagram followers. So that is it. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you're having a lovely day or night, and I'll see you really soon in my next video. Bye.